Welcome to Midnight Casebook, where every shadow hides a secret and every mystery begs to be solved. Tonight, we unravel the chilling tale of Father Brown and the corpse. Knew his name, a fan-made story paying homage to the brilliance of G.K. Chesterton, Chesterton's legendary detective. We'd love to have you along for this enigmatic journey. Drop a comment to let us know where you're watching from, share your theories, and if you spot any inconsistencies, don't hesitate to call them out. Your keen eyes and sharp minds help us craft even more captivating mysteries in the future. Chapter 1. The bell rang twice. The rain was already whispering secrets on the rooftop of St. Dimpner's by the time the bell rang. Once, then again, a long, hollow clang that echoed off the brick tenements like a question nobody wanted to answer. The sound rolled through the fog-thick air, past the shuttered pawnshops and shuttered hearts of East Side. It was just after 10, and the city was drowning in wet neon and old sins. Father Brown didn't startle when the bell sounded. He simply looked up from his worn leather Bible, fingers resting calmly on a passage he had read 100 times and would read 100 more. He waited. The second chime had meaning. Bells don't ring twice at St. Dimpner's unless something or someone is calling from the dark. The last time it had tolled like that was the winter a confession came too late to save a man from the noose. He stood slowly, the soft groan of old wood under his feet, the only sound besides the rain's steady murmur. He was a small man, rounded and mild, with spectacles that always looked ready to fog, and a coat too large for his frame. He looked more like a lost clerk than a man who saw into the souls of murderers. But he'd long ago learned that the devil rarely fears what it cannot see coming. The church doors creaked open before he reached them. A woman stepped inside, bringing the night with her. Smoke, perfume, and something colder than rain. She wore a trench coat too tailored for East Side and heels that had walked on better sidewalks. Her lipstick was blood dark, her eyes shadowed not just by makeup, but by something older and sharper than regret. "Father," she said, voice honeyed, brittle at the edges like glass dipped in molasses. "I need to confess." Father Brown studied her gently, patiently. She hadn't come to confess. Not really. People who come to confess don't wait for bells or dress like sin wrapped in silk. They come in silence and shame. But he motioned her forward just the same, ushering her to the pews where the shadows hung thick as incense. "I killed a man," she said flatly, sitting instead of kneeling. "Or at least, I wanted to." He sat beside her, not close enough to corner her, not far enough to be cold. "There's a difference," he said. "Intent can weigh heavier than action. Though one leaves a body, the other leaves a mark." She lit a cigarette, not bothering to ask. Smoke curled toward the crucifix. "I thought priests didn't talk like poets." "I've heard too many confessions not to," he replied. "Tell me who he was." She hesitated, looking at the dim sanctuary like it might offer her protection. But she wasn't here for forgiveness. She was here for something else. Manipulation, maybe, or misdirection, or protection from something worse. "He was my husband," she said finally. "Or he used to be. Raymond Cole. You've read about him. Real estate shark, club owner, mayor's friend. Missing for 3 days now." Father Brown's expression didn't change. He had seen the headlines, "King of East Side gone silent." But newsprint only told stories people wanted to sell. The truth, the kind that festered and grew teeth, lived in places reporters never looked. He beat you, Father Brown said quietly. Her eyes flickered, just for a moment. He wasn't gentle. But you didn't kill him. No, she said. And for the first time, her voice cracked, not from guilt, but from the cold weight of memory. But I thought about it so much, I almost believed I had. He vanished the night I left him. I was halfway to River Street when I heard the bell. The bell rang twice, Father Brown murmured. I didn't pull it, she said. Someone else did. And that was the beginning of it. The riddle dressed in lipstick and damp silk, her confession too clean, her fear too sharp. Father Brown offered no absolution. Instead, he offered tea. They sat in the rectory while thunder curled like a cat above the slums, and she told him more. About the club Raymond ran called the Velvet Halo, about the men who visited it, cops in dirty suits, judges with dirty secrets, and a saxophonist who played too well to be safe. She didn't cry, not once, but when she left, Father Brown noticed her gloves, silk, dark as night, but with a faint smudge of soot at the fingertips. He walked to the Velvet Halo the next evening, after the rains had turned the streets to mirrors and the alleys to traps. The sign flickered red, half-lit, like a sinner's eye, trying to stay closed. Inside, smoke curled thick above the tables, and the band played a tune that didn't ask for redemption. A man behind the bar polished glasses that hadn't been clean in weeks. He had the kind of face that forgot how to smile around the time Prohibition ended. "You lost, Padre?" he asked. "Only if I'm not supposed to be here," Father Brown said mildly. "But I think I am." The bartender laughed, a dry wheeze that didn't reach his eyes. "This ain't a place for psalms." Father Brown looked around the room. A girl sang on stage with a voice like broken promises. A man in the back corner played cards alone, but his eyes were watching the exits. Near the piano, a shadow moved that didn't quite match the light. "Raymond Cole," Father Brown said. The bartender stiffened. "He's gone, vanished, and left his business unattended." Another voice chimed in, rough and sly. "You got a death wish, priest?" A man stepped out of the shadows, big, square-jawed, eyes like wet gravel. A scar traced his cheek like a signature. A thug, certainly, but not the boss. No, this was the kind of man who made messes for others to clean up. "Only curiosity," Father Brown said. "I find it hard to believe a man like Mr. Cole disappears without someone noticing the blood trail." "Who says there's blood?" "Because if there isn't," said Father Brown, "you'd have found him by now." The man didn't like that, but before he could make a move, the girl on stage screamed. The card player slumped forward, a soft thunk of a head on oak. A second later, a glass shattered on the ground. Chaos stirred like rot in the air. Father Brown was already walking toward the body. The man was still warm. Whiskey spilled from his lips, but it wasn't the drink that killed him. There was no smell of poison, no bruising, just a stillness too sudden, and a hand curled around a scrap of paper. Father Brown gently pulled it free. 3 words, he rang it twice. By then, the cops had arrived. Too fast, Father Brown noted, as if they'd been waiting nearby. One of them was Sergeant Vale, a man with a chin like a shovel and a record of lost evidence longer than a choir boy's Christmas list. Vale looked at Father Brown like he might look at a cockroach that read scripture. "You again?" he grunted. "I'm often where sin lingers," Father Brown replied. Vale didn't like that. "You interfering?" "Just observing. The dead man, he's not from around here, is he?" No ID, Vale said. No prints. Ghost. Ghosts don't leave notes, Father Brown said, handing him the paper. Vale read it. Didn't blink. Meaning? It means, Father Brown said softly, someone knew the bell would ring. Not once, twice, a signal, a summons, perhaps a death knell. Vale scoffed. You see ghosts. I see a drunk who dropped dead. Father Brown didn't argue. He simply walked away, back into the rain. That night, he sat alone in the chapel, the bell above him silent, the Bible on his lap unopened. He wasn't praying. He was remembering the glove, the soot, the bar, the lie inside, a truth inside a lie. And the next morning, when he returned to the Velvet Halo, he came with a question for the singer. She was outside, smoking a thin cigarette that smelled like flowers and arsenic. You were on stage when the man died, he said gently. I was singing, she replied. That's all. But you saw him, and you saw her. Her? Raymond Cole's wife. She was here last night, wasn't she? In the corner, the one with the view of the bell tower. The singer's eyes narrowed. You don't miss much. It's hard to miss a woman who wears gloves in June. She didn't deny it. She saw the man die, Father Brown said, because she expected it. She didn't kill him. No, Father Brown agreed. She just rang the bell. That evening, he returned to the rectory. She was waiting for him, this time without the gloves. I thought you'd come sooner, she said. I wanted to see what you would do. And now? I know the truth. She looked down. I never touched him. You didn't need to. You made a deal. Raymond for Raymond. One to die, one to disappear. You told the man in the club your husband would be in the alley. But you were wrong. Or rather, he turned the tables. He killed your contact and left you the note. She was silent. You planned a disappearance, Father Brown said gently. But sin does not negotiate. It only demands. And then she wept. Later, when the police came and found Raymond Cole's body buried behind the club and the wife taken quietly into custody, Vale asked Father Brown how he knew. The bell, he said. It only rings twice when someone asks forgiveness and someone else answers. Vale shook his head. You're a strange man, Father. I deal with strange sins, Father Brown replied. And outside, the rain kept falling. Chapter 2, A Collar Stained with Blood. The rain had turned mean by the time Father Brown stepped onto Larrabee Street. It slapped the pavement in angry waves and ran down rusted gutters like sewage fleeing the sins of men. Neon signs bled their colors into the mist. Blue, red, gold, but none of them promised salvation. The city wasn't interested in redemption anymore. It wanted silence. And maybe that's why the priest kept walking. Some men drank to forget. Father Brown walked to remember. The body was found outside St. Malachy's, a smaller church with a smaller flock and a reputation for more funerals than weddings. Father Brown wasn't called. He was drawn, as if the wind had whispered a name only he could hear. When he arrived, the place was already crawling with blue uniforms and cold stares. The corpse had been covered, but the shape beneath the tarp was unmistakable. Slumped, neck twisted, hands still clutching a rosary like a man hoping the beads could buy back his last breath. He was a priest. Don't you ever sleep, growled Sergeant Vale, lighting a cigarette that couldn't mask the stench of blood and wet concrete. I sleep enough, Father Brown replied. Not so much that I miss the dead. Vale exhaled smoke through a crooked grin. This one yours? No, But he wore the collar. He wore it, Vale said darkly, lifting the tarp with his boot. But it didn't save him. Father Brown crouched beside the body. The collar was torn, the white tab stained deep crimson. But it wasn't the blood that caught his attention. It was the hands, calloused, not from sermons, but from something rougher, digging, fighting, hiding. The man's knuckles were scraped raw. "Do we know his name?" Father Brown asked. "Father Marcus Hale," Vale muttered. "Served down at the harbour mission. Soup lines, hymns, the works." "And enemies?" Vale scoffed. "Everyone's got enemies in this town." Father Brown looked up. "Even priests?" "Especially priests," Vale muttered, and turned away to bark orders at the rookie, fumbling with a notepad. Father Hale had once served in the East End before disappearing a few years back, quietly, like a man who'd seen too much and wanted to see less. He wasn't the type to make waves, which meant someone had reason to push him under. Later that night, Father Brown sat in the back booth of a bar called the Eightfold Sin, a name that promised nothing good but always delivered. The place stank of old gin, regret, and secrets still smoldering in ashtrays. A woman in a green velvet dress sang to nobody in particular, her voice broken in all the right places. The bartender, a lean man with a twitchy eye and a scar that cut across his scalp like a warning, poured whiskey like he was pouring revenge. Father Brown didn't drink, but he knew where people talked, and the Eightfold was where the kinds of truths nobody wanted to hear got said too loudly after midnight. A man slid into the booth across from him without asking. His suit was expensive but rumpled, and his smile was the kind that never reached his eyes. Dominic Crane, political fixer, cleaner, the sort of man who made problems vanish, and sometimes the people with them. "You're far from holy ground, Padre," Crane said, lighting a cigarette with slow, deliberate fingers. "Sin doesn't respect geography," Father Brown replied. "I follow where it leaves footprints." Crane smirked. "And what are you following tonight? Dead priests?" "One priest," Father Brown corrected gently. "Marcus Hale. You knew him." "I knew of him. He was a sermon in shoes, always trying to save the ones who didn't want saving." "Did he save someone he shouldn't have?" Crane's eyes narrowed. "He talked too much. That was always his problem. Started asking questions about city grants, mission funding, the usual mess." "And you cleaned it up?" Crane shrugged. "I'm a businessman." "So was Judas," Father Brown said softly. "He also dealt in silver." Crane's smile faded. "Careful, Father. You might find yourself without a flock." "I've walked through darker valleys," Father Brown said, rising. He left the bar with his coat damp from drink and rain, and his mind heavier than either. Marcus Hale had poked something rotten, something festering behind the choir boys and charity drives, and someone had made sure he stayed silent. The next day, Father Brown visited the mission. It stood like a tired sentinel by the docks, walls streaked with salt and soot, its door open to anyone with empty hands and hollow eyes. A young woman with ink-stained fingers sat behind the reception desk. Her name tag said Therese, but her eyes said she'd seen too much to believe in miracles. "You're not police," she said, when he asked about Hale. "No," Father Brown replied, "but I've buried enough men to want to know why they die." She studied him. Father Hale was different. He listened, even when he didn't want to hear. What did he hear that scared him? She looked down. He started asking about the night services, Said donations were coming in too clean. That's not how it works here. Nobody gives without a reason. Or without a debt, Father Brown said. She nodded. He had a file, kept it in his room, said he was going to take it to someone. Did he say who? A priest, she said. He only trusted the cloth. That night, Father Brown found the file buried beneath a loose floorboard in Hale's room. Receipts, names, photos of men in uniform shaking hands with men whose hands were never clean. And at the center of it all, a name, Bishop Langford, a man of God, higher than most and lower than many. Father Brown didn't wait. He took the file and walked through the rain to the bishop's residence. It was a cathedral compared to the mission. Marble floors, stained glass, gold trim that caught the light, like it was trying to blind the poor. Langford was waiting in his study, a glass of brandy in one hand, a smile that smelled like politics in the other. Father Brown, he said smoothly, to what do I owe the pleasure? I've brought you something, Father Brown said, placing the file on the desk. Langford didn't open it. Ah, so Marcus's crusade finds another martyr. He didn't die for a cause, Father Brown said. He died for knowing too much. Langford sipped his drink. You think I had something to do with it? I think you had everything to lose. The bishop chuckled. You're a naive man, Father. The church is a house of saints, built on the bones of sinners. We all wear collars, but some are tighter than others. And yours is stained, Father Brown said. Langford rose slowly. You think you can bring this to the police? They already know, Father Brown said. I left a copy with Sergeant Vale. Langford paused, the glass halfway to his lips. He's on my payroll. I know, Father Brown said quietly. That's why I gave it to his partner. She still believes in justice. Langford's hand trembled. You'd destroy a man's life over hearsay? I would remind a man that confession still matters, Father Brown said. Even now. Langford said nothing, but when Father Brown left, he knew the bishop would not sleep well. 2 days later, Langford was found dead in his study. An overdose. No note, just a collar folded neatly beside a bottle of sleeping pills. The papers called it a tragedy. The church called it unfortunate. But Father Brown knew better. Sin, after all, doesn't need a bullet. It just needs time. And as the rain washed the city clean again, he walked through it, not to forget, but to remember. Because every collar that stains red is a warning, and he would not let the city forget what it meant to be saved. Chapter 3. The widow lit no candle. The rain had lost its rhythm by the time Father Brown reached Morrow Street. It didn't fall like a lullaby anymore. It staggered, desperate, scraping down the window panes like a beggar with bloodied knuckles. It was the kind of night the city liked best, slick with secrets, swollen with silence. Somewhere, a saxophone wept behind glass. Somewhere else, a man was being buried in the dark by someone who knew his middle name. Father Brown moved carefully along the slick sidewalk, a hunched figure in a coat too thin for the chill, hat pulled low, boots soaked through. He looked like he belonged nowhere and everywhere, a priest in a city that had forgotten what redemption sounded like. He had received the note just after Vespers. A thin, trembling scrawl slid beneath the chapel door. No signature, just a few words scratched in haste. She didn't light the candle. That alone would not have moved him. Not unless he knew who she was. Her name was Lorraine Darrow, widow of Philip Darrow, one-time prosecutor turned ghost. He'd vanished 2 weeks ago, last seen arguing with a judge in a courthouse stairwell. Official story said suicide. Father Brown knew better. Suicides don't argue before they jump. They whisper apologies to the wind. Besides, Darrow had been on the verge of handing over evidence. Blackmail, corruption, something tangled in the courts. He'd come to Father Brown 3 days before his disappearance. He hadn't confessed his sins, only his fear. And then he was gone. Lorraine Darrow lived in a tall house that had forgotten warmth. Its iron gate groaned like a warning. Its windows were dark, except for a dull glow from the front parlor. She opened the door before he knocked, her figure backlit in amber haze. She wore black, but not the black of mourning. This was tailored grief, satin sorrow, a dress stitched for silence, not sadness. "Father," she said, "how quaint. The church sends you now?" "No," he said quietly, "but someone sent the truth." She stepped aside, letting him in with the air of a hostess who'd already decided how the evening would end. The house smelled faintly of roses and whiskey. Everything was polished, untouched, preserved. Grief in glass display cases. But there were no candles burning, no shrine, no photograph of the late husband surrounded by flickering memory. For a widow, Lorraine Darrow mourned too, neatly. "I remember your husband," Father Brown said. "He lit candles for strangers, even those he'd sentenced." She poured herself a drink. Phil was many things. Sentimental wasn't one of them. "You lie well," Father Brown said. She froze, the glass near her lips. He smiled gently. "But I've heard better lies." In confession, she studied him. "You're not here for my soul, are you?" "No," he replied. "Your soul is beyond me tonight. But your secrets aren't." She laughed, then, short and sharp. "Is that what you think this is? A mystery solved by a collar and quiet eyes?" "No," he said, "but murder never disappears. It waits." Lorraine's smile cracked, like paint left too long in the sun. She turned her back to him and lit a cigarette. The smoke curled above her like a halo drawn in charcoal. "He was going to destroy them," she said after a moment. "The judges, the police, the men in suits who signed prayers with bullets. And they knew it." "And what did you do?" "I asked him to stop," she said. "I begged him, but he couldn't." "You loved him." "I tried to," she whispered. "But Phil didn't love people. He loved causes, justice, like it was a woman he wanted to seduce." Father Brown looked at the mantel, dustless, loveless, empty. "No candle," he said softly, "because you knew he wasn't coming back. Because I didn't want him to." There it was, not a confession, something colder. "He came home that night," she said, wet, furious. He'd finally gotten the files, copies of testimonies, bribes, things he said would blow the courthouse wide open. He handed them to me and said, "If anything happens, give these to the press." "And I burned them," she said. "The moment he left, I watched them curl and blacken. I chose peace. For me." Father Brown nodded. "And when he didn't return, I thought it was done, clean. But then someone rang my door 3 nights ago. No face, no voice, just a knock and a package." She walked to the writing desk and returned with a small parcel. Inside were charred fragments of paper. One fragment still bore Philip Darrow's initials, singed but readable. "He didn't destroy the originals," she whispered, "and someone knows." Father Brown took the box, his fingers brushing the ash. You should leave, she said suddenly. Whatever's coming, it doesn't care if you wear a collar. He rose without a word. She followed him to the door, where the rain greeted him like an old sin. As he stepped out, he turned to her. There's still time to light a candle, he said. If not for him, then for yourself. She didn't answer, and she didn't light one. The next morning, a body turned up in a warehouse near the edge of the docks. Face down, hands bound, a bullet through the neck. No ID, but Father Brown didn't need one. The missing judge Philip Darrow had threatened, Oswald Reeve, had vanished 2 days earlier. Now he floated in cold water beneath a broken beam. Sergeant Vale was already there, chewing a matchstick with all the enthusiasm of a man chewing through regret. "Don't tell me you saw this coming," he said when he spotted Father Brown. "I saw the storm," the priest replied. "The lightning was inevitable." Vale grunted. He was being blackmailed. We found notes in his safe, threats, demands. And they were written on stationery from Lorraine Darrow's house. Father Brown closed his eyes. "No," he said. "They weren't." Vale raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "She didn't send them," Father Brown said. "She wanted peace. Someone else wants punishment." Vale frowned. "Who?" "The same person who knocked on her door. The one who left the package. They want justice, but not the kind that ends in court." That night, Father Brown returned to Lorraine's house. The lights were out, the gate ajar. The silence felt too rehearsed. Inside, he found her in the parlor, glass shattered at her feet, hands trembling. "He called," she said. "He said I owed him, that I had to finish what Phil started, or he'd light the candle for me." "What did he want?" "For me to come to the press," she said, "to say I knew everything, to name names, to confess Phil's crusade. And will you?" She looked at him, and for the first time, there was real fear in her eyes. Not fear of exposure, fear of dying without grace. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Father Brown nodded. "Good. But first, come with me." They went to the chapel. No congregation, no choir, just silence and wood. He handed her a candle. She lit it with a trembling hand, and it flickered like a soul, trying to remember warmth. The next day, the press exploded. Names, corruption, scandals that stained every office from the precinct to the courthouse steps. 2 nights later, they found another body, this one in an alley near the Eightfold. Sin, a man no one could name. Burn marks on his fingers, a locket in his coat pocket. It held a photo of Philip Darrow. Father Brown stood over the body as the rain began again. Vale joined him, coat collar high. "Any idea who he was?" "No," Father Brown said. "But he believed in vengeance, in justice, maybe in Philip." "You think he killed the judge?" "I think he lit a candle," Father Brown replied. "With fire, not wax." Vale sighed. "City's changing, Father." "No," Father Brown said. "It's remembering." And he walked away as the candle in the chapel burned low behind him. Chapter 4. The Psalms were whispered wrong. The city never really slept. It just muttered in its sleep. Murmurs of car horns and alley whispers, a lullaby for the broken and the damned. Fog wrapped the lampposts in gauze and smeared neon into drunken smears of blue and red. Father Brown walked slowly down Eden Street, past shuttered storefronts and cracked crucifixes, the collar at his neck tight with rain and secrets. Somewhere nearby, a man screamed. Somewhere else, a child sang, softly, and for a moment, they sounded the same. It had started with a phone call, scratchy, incomplete. A voice whispering, Psalm 23, but wrong. The words bent, twisted, something guttural beneath the reverence. Yea, though I walk through the alley of death, not valley. Alley, that alone was enough to make Father Brown stop mid-prayer and sit in silence. The caller hadn't left a name, but the tone had trembled, not with fear, but something far worse. Guilt. A psalm was meant to comfort. This one warned, the Church of Saint. Agnes stood, like a guilty monument between a betting parlour and a liquor store, its stained glass windows dimmed by soot and years. It hadn't held a proper mass in months, only the occasional funeral, when no other parish would take the body. Father Brown arrived just before midnight, the chapel doors unlocked, though no lights shone. Inside, the sanctuary was cloaked in a smoky hush. Pew wood groaned like it remembered better days, and someone was waiting near the altar. She stood like a statue carved from shadows, thin veil over her face, black gloves pulled tight, voice like whispered confessions in a dark box. Father, she said, they're praying wrong. Father Brown tilted his head. Then perhaps they've forgotten what they're praying for. She turned, and though her face was mostly hidden, the shape of her mouth carried a familiar curve, one more accustomed to silence than speaking. I'm Sister Eloise, she said, caretaker of St. Agnes. We haven't had a priest in some time. And yet you called one. I didn't call, she said softly. He did. Who? Brother Marcus. Father Brown frowned. There is no Brother Marcus on the rolls of the diocese. There was, she said, once. And that's when the trouble started, because once meant he was no longer, and no longer could mean dead, or disappeared, or worse, silenced. He led midnight prayers, Eloise said, for those who couldn't be seen in daylight, junkies, gamblers, men who forgot how to kneel. And he vanished? She hesitated. Not vanished. Removed. Father Brown took a breath. There are kinds of removal. Which kind was his? She didn't answer. Instead, she walked toward the altar, her steps echoing too loudly. They buried him in the basement crypt, said it was illness. But there was no funeral, no rites, no psalms. Then that's why they're whispering them wrong, Father Brown said, because he didn't finish them. Later that night, Father Brown knelt in the crypt. It was colder than death should be. Rows of sealed coffins lined the walls, names scrawled on metal tags with fading faith. Brother Marcus's plaque was newer than the others, but the stone beneath it had already cracked. Not from age, from pressure. He tapped gently on the lid. It rang hollow. Father Brown stood. Behind him, the shadows shifted. You shouldn't be here, Father, said a voice. He turned to find two men, one in city maintenance coveralls, the other with the look of a boxer who lost too many fights but kept showing up anyway. Church is closed, the boxer said. Only to those who need hiding, Father Brown replied. The coveralls guy stepped closer. We were told to keep things quiet. I can see that, Father Brown said, especially the graves. Father Marcus liked to stir the pot, the boxer said. He brought in the wrong crowd. Street trash, men with knives under their rosaries. So you silenced him? No, the coveralls man said. We just told him to stop. The bishop ordered it. Father Brown blinked. Langford is dead. Not that bishop. He understood. Then, St. Agnes wasn't part of the city's Catholic grid anymore. It had become something else, a place where shadows gathered not for salvation, but sanctuary of another kind. A rogue chapel, off the books, holy, only in appearance. Then who ordered the body buried without rites? Father Brown asked. The boxer smiled with missing teeth. He's upstairs. They let him go. Maybe they thought he wouldn't make trouble. Maybe they knew it was too late to stop what was already stirring. The man upstairs lived in the rectory, called himself Father Jean, though no one could say where he was ordained. He had eyes like stagnant water and fingers stained with ink from too many donation ledgers. We serve the forgotten, Jean said as he poured a drink. The real church forgets them. I don't. But you bury them without blessing, Father Brown asked. You let psalms die on tongues without finishing them? Because those aren't psalms, Jean said. They're warnings. Father Brown sat. To whom? To you. The drink Jean offered smelled like dust and rot. Father Brown didn't touch it. You killed Marcus. No, Jean said. Marcus killed himself. Slowly, every time he handed out food instead of doctrine. Every time he forgave a junkie who didn't ask. That kind of mercy makes men soft. Or strong, Father Brown said. Jean leaned forward. This city doesn't want priests anymore, Father. It wants prophets, firebrands. It wants vengeance, dressed in vestments. I give them that. And what does it cost? Jean grinned. Only their sins. Father Brown stood. You don't absolve. You hoard. You trade guilt for obedience. Jean's face twisted. Obedience saves. No, Father Brown said, walking to the door. Only grace does. He left the chapel as dawn bled onto the horizon like a wound too tired to heal. He returned to his own church and lit a candle for Marcus, then one for Sister Eloise, then one for the city. 3 nights later, Jean was found dead in his rectory, poison in his wine. No forced entry, no struggle, only a single psalm, handwritten and left on the desk. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. But it ended there. No mention of the valley, no rod or staff, no fear. The psalm had stopped halfway. Just like Marcus, Vale said it was suicide. Father Brown said it wasn't. You think Eloise did it? Vale asked. No, Father Brown said. She already buried one priest. She wouldn't bury another. Then who? Father Brown stared at the horizon. Maybe someone trying to finish the psalm. Vale grunted. You believe in ghosts now? No, Father Brown said. Only in sins that won't stay buried. And somewhere in the wind, the last line of Psalm 23 whispered itself into the night, not by a mouth, but by memory, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. But in Saint Agnes, no one whispered it right. Not yet. Chapter 5. A Knife Behind the Cross. The fog rolled in heavy that evening, thick as wool and twice as unforgiving. It swirled through the crooked alleys of Eastbridge like something alive, curling around lampposts and swallowing footfalls before they reached the ground. Even the neon signs seemed muffled, their lurid colors bleeding against the mist, like stained glass left out in the rain. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled, not the call of salvation, but the slow iron groan of a city announcing another death. Father Brown stood alone beneath the flickering arch of St. Jude's, a modest parish now hemmed in by pawnshops, back-alley clinics, and bars that never quite closed. The building had once been grand, he'd heard. Now it sagged with age, a stooped old man wearing robes too rich for his condition. He ran a gloved hand along the door frame. Splintered wood, fresh. Someone had forced it open in a hurry. Not a parishioner, not a beggar. Something darker had moved through here. Inside, the church was quiet. Too quiet. Even the rats, usually scurrying along the eaves, seemed to have fled. Pews were upended, hymnals strewn like fallen leaves. The altar cloth had been torn halfway down, the gold-stitched fringe dangling like a hangman's noose. And behind the pulpit, half hidden in shadows and candlelight, was what remained of Father Gannon. The man lay crumpled against the wall beneath the crucifix, his robes soaked in, a dark maroon that had once been red. One hand clutched a rosary, the beads slick with blood. The other reached toward the base of the altar, where something protruded just barely from a loose panel. A blade. Small, elegant, almost ceremonial. A knife, and it had been carefully placed behind the cross, its hilt facing outward, as if waiting to be discovered. Father Brown stepped closer, the hem of his coat brushing along shards of stained glass. He didn't flinch. Death no longer surprised him, but symbols always meant more than wounds, and whoever had done this knew the weight of both. The back door creaked open. A woman stood in the frame, the fog curling around her ankles like a loyal pet. She wore black gloves, a velvet coat, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed most of her face, but not her eyes. Her eyes were steel. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "Neither should you," Father Brown replied. "I came to mourn," she said, stepping inside. "Not many mourn with gloves on." She smiled, thin as a knife's edge. "I prefer not to leave fingerprints." "Then you're either clever," Father Brown said, "or guilty." "I'm both." She walked toward the altar and knelt beside Gannon's body. He was a good man once, until he started listening. Listening to what? To ghosts, old debts, buried sins. Father Brown tilted his head. And what did he find? "Something sharp," she whispered. "Something that bled." Her name, he would later learn, was Evelyn Lang, once a singer in a smoky dive called the Lazarus Club. Now a name whispered in back rooms, connected to men with guns and rumors with legs. "He called you, didn't he?" Father Brown asked. She nodded. "3 nights ago. Said he had something for me. Said it was time to set things right." "But you didn't come." "I did," she said. "Too late." Father Brown studied her closely. Her grief was real, but it wasn't clean. There was guilt swimming in it. Guilt wrapped in pride. "What did he have for you?" She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded letter, blood-stained at the edges. It was behind the altar. I didn't want the police to find it. He opened it carefully. Inside were names, dates, a ledger of donations, but the names weren't parishioners. They were cops, judges, union bosses, and the donations weren't tithes. They were payouts, cover-ups. Gannon had been keeping records, and he'd hidden them behind the cross. "Blackmail?" Father Brown asked. "Confession," Evelyn said. "He used to say the Lord already knew, but the ledger made it real. And now he's dead." She looked away. They always kill the messenger. Father Brown folded the paper and slid it into his pocket. Unless the messenger knows how to send a message back. The police came just after dawn, led by Inspector Mallory, a man with a voice like gravel and a conscience left in storage. He eyed Father Brown with open suspicion. "You, again?" Mallory said. "You got a knack for standing over corpses." "I have a calling," Father Brown replied. Mallory scoffed. You trying to solve this one too? I'm trying to understand it. Mallory lit a cigarette and exhaled toward the altar. Looks like a robbery gone bad. Robbers don't hide knives behind crosses, Father Brown said. Mallory turned. You saying this was personal? I'm saying it was symbolic. Mallory didn't like that. Symbolism made his job harder. So he shrugged and wrote it up as another statistic. Later that afternoon, Father Brown visited the Lazarus Club. Smoke drifted like ghosts above the stage, and a piano played a lullaby for the damned. Evelyn was there, singing to a room that wasn't listening. She saw him and kept singing. Afterward, they sat at a table near the back, away from the eyes that knew too much. He was going to release the names, she said. Said the church had to bleed before it healed. Did he say how? He mentioned a confession. Said someone else had spoken up, a man with a badge. Said he saw the knife before it disappeared. Father Brown leaned in. A cop? She nodded. Said he used to guard the donations, knew what went where and what didn't. That night, Father Brown found the man, Detective Roland March. He was half drunk in a bar on Brodie Street, the kind of place where hangovers came with loyalty cards. March had a crooked nose and eyes like puddles after a storm. You here to save me? He asked. No, Father Brown said. I'm here to listen. March laughed bitterly. I already confessed once. Didn't help. To whom? To Gannon? He made me say it twice. Once for the church, once for myself. And what did you confess? That I looked the other way. When the money came. When the men in collars shook hands with men in brass. And the knife? March's eyes darkened. It was part of a relic from the old vault. Gannon said it belonged to a martyr. Used to remind us of sacrifice. And now? Now it reminds us that sacrifice usually comes with blood. Father Brown left him there, slumped against the bar, whispering a prayer he didn't believe in. 2 days later, a second priest was found dead. This one at St. Adrian's. Similar wound, similar setting, no knife. But the cross had been turned upside down. The papers called it a religious killer. The city called it bad luck. But Father Brown knew better. It wasn't about religion. It was about reckoning. He returned to St. Jude's, to the place where Gannon had fallen. And behind the altar, he found something new. Another letter. This one addressed to the next to fall. It read, You preach forgiveness, but your silence has cost lives. One cut for each name you buried, one for every hand that took without penance. He folded the letter, and then he lit a candle. That night, he went to Evelyn. You're not safe, he said. She smiled. I never was. They'll come for you. Let them, he nodded. Then we'll be ready. They waited. For 3 nights. On the 4th, the killer came. Not masked, not subtle, just a man in plain clothes with rage in his veins and scars on his hands. He held the knife like a relic. But Father Brown saw what it really was. Guilt made steel. You let them do it, the man hissed. You watched. You blessed the blood. I tried to stop it, Evelyn said. Too late, he snarled. Father Brown stepped forward. And what will this accomplish? The man turned. Balance. No, Father Brown said. Only more weight. Guilt doesn't drown alone. It drags the innocent with it. The man's hand trembled. You want redemption? Father Brown asked. Put down the knife. Or do you want to become what you hate? The silence stretched. Then the knife clattered to the floor. They arrested him that night. His name was Darius Finch, once a seminarian, left the cloth when his brother died in a cover-up. The cover-up Gannon had tried to expose. The city moved on. The papers wrote it up as justice. The church issued a statement. But Father Brown knew the truth was still buried, just deeper now. And behind the cross at St. Jude's, he left a note of his own. Not all sins bleed, but all of them remember. Chapter 6. The Letter That Burned Itself. It began, like most things in this city, with smoke. Not the thick, acrid kind that wafts from burning tires or backroom cigars, but the delicate, almost reverent thread of paper turned to ash. The kind of smoke that whispers secrets instead of shouting them. Father Brown smelled it before he saw it. Not incense, not the usual offerings brought by sinners looking to bargain with God, but scorched parchment, faint ink still clinging to the air, like guilt refusing to leave. He followed it to the rectory mailbox. Inside, charred edges curled inward around a blackened center. The envelope was sealed in wax once. He could still see the faint outline of a symbol, a ring, a bishop's ring, to be precise. Whoever sent the letter knew the church, and knew it well, and whoever burned it, halfway through delivery, had done so with intent, not haste. This was not an accident. This was a warning. The postmark was blurred, but the E writing on the corner was clear enough. Eleanor Dusk. That name hadn't surfaced in 6 years. Not since she vanished after her husband, Councilman Raymond Dusk, had been found floating in the harbor with rosary beads sewn into his chest pocket and a suicide note that read more like scripture than despair. The case had been wrapped fast, with quiet signatures and even quieter payoffs. But Father Brown remembered. He always remembered the names that didn't quite fit the shape of their stories. By noon, he was in the North Side, the kind of place where God came only if escorted by armed guards. There, behind a shuttered bakery and a broken neon sign that once promised angels' cakes, lived a woman who claimed to be nobody's widow and everybody's burden. Eleanor opened the door with the slow grace of someone waiting for a knock she dreaded. "You always come late," she said. "And you always assume I've been sent," Father Brown answered, removing his hat. She stepped aside. Her apartment was tidy, not clean, like someone had prepared it for a guest, but didn't care if that guest saw through the presentation. A single candle burned on the windowsill, its flame steady despite the draft. "I sent the letter yesterday," she said. "Wrote it 3 times before sealing it. Then I walked it to the post office myself." "It never made it," Father Brown said. "Only the smell did." She closed her eyes. "Then he knows I talked." "Who?" She sat down, her hand trembling just slightly. "They call him Knox. Used to be a priest, or said he was. He has a church now, a fake one. Holds sermons behind a slaughterhouse on Dutchman's Lane." Father Brown had heard of it. The House of Holy Resolve. No cross above the door. No invitation extended. Just whispers of confessions that turned into contracts. The kind of place where sins were named not to be forgiven, but weaponized. "Raymond visited him before he died," Eleanor said. "I didn't know then. But afterward, I found notes. Pages from a journal. There were names. Judges, cops. You, me." Father Brown nodded slowly. "And what did Knox offer them?" "Freedom," she said. "But not from guilt, from consequence." "You tried to send me what you found?" She reached under a cushion and pulled out another letter. This one sealed in wax, intact. He took it gently. "It's the last copy," she whispered. Don't let it burn. He didn't. Not then. He tucked it inside his coat, said nothing else, and left her with her candle. Outside, the fog had started to roll in again, wrapping buildings in the kind of soft menace that made even the righteous nervous. Father Brown walked back toward the chapel, but he never made it. 2 blocks from the rectory, a car door swung open and a hand pulled him in. The air inside stank of leather and menace. The man in the front seat had the kind of face you didn't forget, but always wished you could. "Evening, Father," he said. "We heard you've been receiving mail." Father Brown didn't answer. The man in the back seat beside him did all the talking now. He had brass knuckles and a chipped tooth, and he wasn't wearing either for fashion. "Thing is," he said, "some letters carry curses. You read them, you bleed." "I was under the impression that only truth does that," Father Brown said quietly. Brass Knuckles didn't smile. "Hand it over." Father Brown reached into his coat and passed them a blank envelope. They tore it open. Empty. Brass Knuckles growled. "You're not as clever as you think." "No," Father Brown said. "I'm just not as afraid." They dropped him in an alley after that. He landed hard, but not broken. His ribs ached, and his collar had torn slightly. But the real letter remained hidden, tucked between the pages of his old Bible, where nobody ever dared look too closely, especially not men who feared God more than they respected him. That night, he opened the envelope alone, the chapel lit only by flickering votive light. The letter inside was simple. 4 pages of names, sums of money, sins committed like ritual. And at the bottom, Knox's real name, Father Silas Crane, defrocked, disappeared, reborn as a shepherd of fear. The next morning, Father Brown walked to Dutchman's Lane. The slaughterhouse was quiet now, but behind it stood a structure that resembled a chapel, only in silhouette. Inside, a dozen pews faced a blank wall, where a cross should have hung. Instead, there was a ledger nailed to the plaster, its pages turned with each passing sermon. At the far end stood Knox, tall, robed, eyes hollow like the sockets of saints long abandoned. "Brother," he said with a smile, "we feared you wouldn't come." "I'm not your brother," Father Brown said, "and you stopped fearing anything a long time ago." Knox stepped down. "Eleanor talks too much." "She confesses," Father Brown corrected. "That's different." Knox waved a hand. 2 men approached. Big, grim, the kind who thought intimidation replaced morality. "You're out of place here," Knox said. "Then I'm in the right place," Father Brown replied. Knox chuckled. "You've read the letter, haven't you?" "Yes." "And?" "You've built your church on secrets," Father Brown said. "But secrets rot. They turn into blackmail, betrayal, murder. Only if they're exposed. They always are." Knox stepped closer. "You think I'm afraid of excommunication? I built this altar from the ashes of that word." "No," Father Brown said. "You're afraid of being irrelevant." The men stepped forward. "I wouldn't," Father Brown said calmly. "The moment you touch me, this city burns." Knox narrowed his eyes. "You don't have that kind of power." "No," Father Brown said, "but Eleanor does. She made more copies." It was a lie, but it didn't sound like one. Knox hesitated. "She gave them to the wrong people." Father Brown went on to barmaids, to widows, to men who believe they have nothing left to lose. "You're bluffing." "I'm praying," Father Brown said, "and you know how dangerous that can be." Silence filled the chapel. Finally, Knox raised a hand. "Let him go." Father Brown turned to leave. "You think this ends here?" Knox called after him. "No," Father Brown said. "This ends where it began, with a letter and a sin." He left them standing in their paper temple. That night, a fire broke out in Dutchman's Lane. By dawn, the fake church was gone. No bodies found, just scorched wood and a single brass cross melted into the ground. The police called it arson. The church called it unfortunate. Father Brown called it justice. And in his rectory, he burned the letter at last, not in fear, but in closure. Some truths, after all, are not meant to be read aloud. They are meant to be prayed for. Chapter 7. Confession came before the crime. The night bled red across the wet pavement. Neon flickers smeared in the puddles like sins too stubborn to stay buried. Rain fell slow but steady, a soft percussion against the corrugated awnings of East Godwin Street, where even the ghosts walked hunched and silent. Father Brown moved through it like a shadow in reverse, small, steady, too ordinary to be feared, too knowing to be ignored. The city, with its hunger and haunts, had long stopped, trying to scare him. It had tried violence. It had tried lies. But Father Brown only ever answered with patience, and a prayer too quiet to disturb even the worst of men. The door to St. Magdalen's had been unlocked when he arrived. That was unusual. The old church sat on the border between the city's scarred belly and the neighborhoods that pretended they didn't bleed. It had once been a fortress for the tired and the lost, but now it was mostly empty pews and stories whispered, too late. But that night, someone had been there first. Inside, the air smelled of candle wax, damp wood, and something sharper. Gun oil. Not strong, just a trace, like a memory someone was trying to forget. The confessional stood ajar, not open, just cracked, as though someone had left in a hurry, or hadn't left at all. Father Brown stepped toward it, not out of fear, but obligation. That was when he saw the note, slipped between the slats, held fast with a rusted nail. A page, torn from a ledger, lined and precise, but the words scrawled in haste. "I confess before the act, because afterward I won't have the courage. He deserves it. I'll kill him tonight, and I'll ask forgiveness in the morning. God help me." There was no name, just that one paragraph. No signature, no blood, just the kind of quiet madness that comes when guilt writes a check it hasn't yet cashed. Father Brown didn't touch the note. He stood there, hands in his coat, listening, not to the building, but to what it held. Fear, desperation, the echoes of someone who thought confession could buy them absolution on credit. But sin doesn't work like that. It collects interest. And sometimes it calls before the crime is even committed. He went straight to Mallory. The inspector wasn't the kind of man who opened doors for priests, but Father Brown had long stopped waiting for invitations. He found him at the brass tap, nursing a rye and scowling at a world he'd given up on policing years ago. "You'll want to hear this," Father Brown said, sitting across from him uninvited. Mallory didn't even glance up. "Another sermon, Father? Save it for the funeral. I think that's exactly what I'm trying to prevent." He told him about the note, the confessional, the preemptive guilt of a man who'd decided justice needed to bleed. Mallory snorted. "You know how many people threaten murder in this city? Hell, half of them are honest about it. But few do it. With pen and paper," Father Brown said. "And fewer still think they're doing it with God's permission." That got Mallory's attention. "What are you saying?" he muttered. Some holy assassin? No, Father Brown said. Just someone very human. Someone who's made up their mind and left their soul behind to take the fall. Mallory leaned back, exhaled smoke. You don't have a name, a target, nothing to go on. I have one thing, Father Brown said. They're doing it tonight. That was enough. Mallory grunted and waved over his second, a younger officer named Chili's, who still believed laws could bend without breaking. They pulled strings, checked reports, nothing big planned in the usual corners, no gang meetings, no political fundraisers, just one quiet, upscale gathering across town. An exclusive dinner hosted by Councilman Heath Ridge. Father Brown hadn't heard that name in years, not since Ridge had been photographed shaking hands with a man who disappeared days later with half the city's flood relief funds. That scandal had sunk others. Ridge had risen, and now he was hosting a small gathering for trusted associates in his penthouse above Marlowe Avenue. It was the kind of event you didn't crash without a tailored suit or a wiretap warrant. But Father Brown didn't need either. He showed up just after 10, looking like a misplaced delivery boy with a collar and a Bible instead of a tray. The doorman blinked, unsure what to do with a priest who looked like he belonged nowhere, and yet walked like he owned the building. Ridge's assistant intercepted him in the foyer, a tall woman in crimson heels and a tighter smile. Father Brown, he said, I'm not here to bless the roast. I'm afraid Councilman Ridge is indisposed. No, Father Brown said calmly, he's in danger. That word cracked her composure. For a moment something shifted in her eyes, not surprise, but calculation. She opened her mouth to respond, but someone screamed before she could. It came from the private dining room, where Ridge had been entertaining 3 guests and a bottle of something French enough to make them feel untouchable. The body lay slumped over the table, glass shattered, blood trickling from the temple. Only it wasn't Ridge, it was his driver, dead, shot clean between the eyes. And standing over him was a man in a server's uniform, shaking, gun in hand, tears running rivers down his cheeks. Where is he? The man choked out. Where's the bastard? Ridge stood frozen in the corner, pale but untouched. The man turned, gun raised, hand trembling. Father Brown stepped in front of him before anyone else moved. You already confessed, he said softly. Don't finish it. The man's eyes were wild. He killed my brother. Then don't kill what's left of yourself. The man faltered. The gun dropped. Mallory arrived 10 minutes too late, but just in time to make the arrest. The server's name was Devon Silas. His brother had worked for Ridge, been caught in some shady development deal, gone missing a year ago. Ridge had paid off the papers, paid off the cops, but not the guilt. That stayed with Devon. He'd snuck into the party posing as a caterer, found the gun in the glove box of the driver's car. He'd intended to shoot Ridge, but nerves or fate intervened. The driver, reaching for a napkin, startled him. And now one innocent was dead. Another damned. Mallory shook his head. He'll hang for this. Maybe, Father Brown said, but he already did. In that booth. When he wrote it down. Mallory looked at him. You think that makes a difference? Yes, Father Brown said quietly, because it means he wanted to be stopped. Devon was led away in cuffs. Ridge gave a statement full of shock and righteous indignation. The assistant said nothing, but her silence carried the weight of someone who'd just dodged a bullet in every sense. Father Brown stayed behind, after the police cleared out. He stood alone in the dining room, watching the blood congeal on white linen. Ridge stepped in, glass in hand. "You've got nerve, Father. You've got ghosts," Father Brown replied. Ridge smirked. "You think this ends me?" "No," Father Brown said. "But it started something." Ridge drained the glass. "This city doesn't care about sin. Only headlines." Father Brown looked at him. "Sin doesn't. Read the papers. It writes the endings." Later, back at St. Magdalene's, he stepped into the confessional once more. The note was still there. He folded it carefully, placed it inside his Bible, a reminder that sometimes the soul screams before the gun fires, and when it does, someone has to be listening. Chapter 8. The stranger sat in Father's pew. The first thing Father Brown noticed was the hat, a wide-brimmed fedora, tilted low enough to shield the eyes, but not low enough to mask intent. It was too clean for Eastbridge, too dry for the downpour outside, too deliberate to be forgotten. It rested atop a man who sat perfectly still in the third pew from the front, Father Brown's pew. He didn't mind the intrusion, not really, but he recognized the message. The man wasn't just here to pray. He was here to be seen. It was Thursday evening, the kind of night when the sanctuary echoed with the quiet hum of flickering candles and the sigh of wood expanding in damp silence. Father Brown had arrived early for evening vespers, though no one ever came on Thursdays except the faithful few and the truly guilty. The man in the pew was neither. He was tall, lean, dressed in an ash-colored suit that clung like a second conscience. The pew groaned slightly beneath his weight, but he made no move, not even when Father Brown stepped past the altar and lit the sanctuary lamp. "You've taken my seat," Father Brown said, his voice mild. The man didn't look up. "I figured a man of God wouldn't mind sharing." "I never mind sharing," Father Brown replied. "But that pew's a bit peculiar. That seat leans just a fraction. It creaks on the inhale." The man smiled faintly. "I like the sound of a church breathing." "Then you're in the right place," Father Brown said. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the rain tap-dancing on the roof and the occasional creak of the old building remembering its bones. Finally, the man spoke. "You've heard of me," he said. "I've heard of many men," Father Brown said. "Name's Leon Moreau." Father Brown nodded once. That name didn't belong in a church. It belonged on ledgers, written in red ink. Gunrunner, casino fixer, owner of half the East Side's debt and all its fear. His face had appeared in a half-dozen court sketches and 0 mugshots. A man whose power wasn't shouted, it was whispered. "What brings you here?" Father Brown asked. "I lost something," Moreau said, "and I need help getting it back." "Lost things usually find their way to confession," Father Brown said, "or the gutter." "This one's worth more than both," Moreau said, finally turning to meet Father Brown's eyes. "It's a girl. Name's Isla. She ran out last week. Took something that belongs to me." "A person isn't something," Father Brown said quietly. Moreau smiled without warmth. "Depends on the contract." Father Brown studied him. "And you thought I could find her?" "You have a reputation," Moreau said, "not just for sermons. For answers, I listen," Father Brown said. "Sometimes that's enough." "I don't need sermons, Father. I need a direction. She's clever, but not invisible. Someone saw her." "People see all kinds of things," Father Brown said, "especially when they want to be seen." Moreau stood then, slowly. "If you find her, Tell her I just want to talk. Father Brown looked down at the man's gloves. Leather. No creases, no stains. The kind of gloves worn by someone who never had to pull his own trigger. I'll tell her, Father Brown said, if she wants to be found. Moreau left without another word. No blessing, no backward glance, just the soft click of polished shoes fading into the stone steps outside. Father Brown sat in the pew he'd vacated, listening to the echo of a soul that didn't believe it still had one. The next morning, the rain broke just long enough for the city's shadows to crawl out from their hiding places. Father Brown went to the Rusted Bell, a dive tucked beneath an old railway bridge where people drank to forget and played piano to remember. He knew the bartender, a woman named Roz, who'd once confessed to arson with more relief than regret. You ever seen a girl named Isla come through here? He asked. Roz raised an eyebrow. Isla, tall, freckles, voice like a radio singer. She came through last Friday, asked for coffee. Nobody asked for coffee here. Did she say where she was headed? She left something behind, Roz said, reaching beneath the bar. She handed over a small notepad, half full. She wrote poems, or notes, maybe prayers. Father Brown flipped through. The writing was rushed, but not careless. She wrote about being watched, about debt and escape. On the last page, just one word: confessor. She was looking for a priest, he said. Roz nodded. A scared one. Father Brown left with the notebook in his coat. The word confessor rang in his ears like a bell without a steeple. It wasn't just him she'd come looking for. It was anyone who'd listen without judgment. He tried the shelters next, then the train yards, then the old mission where guilt and grace were traded like soup. No, Isla, no trace, just rumors of a girl with copper hair and a voice too steady for the storm around her. It was 2 nights later that the next clue came, wrapped in fire. Someone set ablaze behind St. Agnes. Nothing major, a warning, not a statement, but tucked into the mailbox was a charred page from Isla's notebook. A line underlined in black. He only wants me back, because I know where the bodies are buried. Father Brown went to Mallory. The inspector was half drunk and full of contempt. She's in over her head, he muttered. Girl crosses Moreau, she's already ash. But she's not, Father Brown said, and that means she still thinks truth can save her. Mallory scoffed. Truth doesn't save, Father. Leverage does. She thinks they're the same. Mallory's laugh was short. Poor kid. Father Brown spent the next day walking the alleys of Old Greystone, once the city's pulse, now its scar. Near midnight, he found her. She was in the chapel of an abandoned seminary, curled in the front pew, as though sleep might be safer where ghosts knelt before they fell. You found me, she said, not startled. You left a trail, Father Brown replied. Some of it was ash. She sat up, eyes wary. Did he send you? He sat in my pew, Father Brown said. Asked me to tell you he just wants to talk. She laughed bitterly. That's what he said. The last time. Before he had my brother's knees broken. What did you take from him? She reached into her coat. A single photo. Faded. Grainy. It showed Moreau standing with 2 men. One of them was Judge Leland Marston. The other, Councilman Ridge. Still alive, still untouchable. They buried someone, she said, out in the East Docks. A man who saw too much. My brother was supposed to be next. You have proof? She pulled out a flash drive. I need to get it to someone, she said. Someone who won't sell it back to him. Father Brown held out his hand. I can get it to the right person. Will that stop him? No, Father Brown said, but it will start something. She hesitated, then placed it in his palm. He rose to leave, then paused. Why come here? He asked. She looked around the decayed chapel. Because this is the last place men like him want to follow. He nodded. The next day, Father Brown delivered the drive to Chili's. The only cop he still believed had a spine unbent by gold or fear. By evening, news had already leaked. Investigation, a grand jury, maybe even prison. Moreau didn't wait. He came back to the church. No hat this time, just rage beneath silk. You gave her sanctuary, he said. I gave her silence, Father Brown said. You don't know what she started. No, Father Brown said. I know what you tried to end. You think this saves anyone? I think confession always comes before absolution or consequence. Moreau stepped closer, fists clenched. You're not safe, he whispered. Father Brown looked at him. I never was. Moreau left. 3 days later, he disappeared. No body, no headlines, just gone. Isla left the city not long after. Her name changed, her fear buried. Father Brown still sat in his pew, third from the front, leaned just a little to the left, creaked on the inhale. But some nights, he swore, it breathed with something new. Hope. Chapter 9. A glove left in the nave. It was the kind of rain that didn't clean the city. It just made it bleed slower. The gutters gurgled like choked confessionals, and the street lamps flickered in a rhythm that matched the uneasy breath of Eastbridge. At St. Bart's, the nave was empty, but for shadows and the scent of wax. Vespers had ended, though no one had really come for the prayers. They came for silence now, for anonymity, for the small, trembling promise that God hadn't yet turned his back. Father Brown noticed the glove before he noticed the blood. It was lying just beneath the third pew on the right, near the center aisle. Black leather, slender, the kind worn by women who cared about impressions more than warmth. Not soaked, but damp along the seams. There was a smudge on the fingertips, dark, sticky, unmistakably red. He picked it up gently and turned it in his palm. Not dropped, discarded, left there deliberately. There was always a difference. People who lose things don't lose them near the altar. They lose them in pews or foyers or doorways. But this one had been laid in the quietest part of the sanctuary, between reverence and ritual. Like an accusation, no one had the courage to say aloud. He sat with it for a long moment before he heard the footfall behind him, light, uncertain, but coming fast. A woman entered through the side door, her coat soaked through, her lipstick smeared like regret. She stopped when she saw him. "That's mine," she said softly. Father Brown didn't answer immediately. He just looked at her the way he often looked at statues of saints, trying to determine what suffering made them kneel. "I assumed it might be," he said, "though it seems it's picked up something since it left your hand." She stepped forward slowly. "He's dead, isn't he?" Father Brown raised an eyebrow. "The man in the confessional," she said. I saw you from outside, after I ran." "Who was he?" She hesitated. Then, as if crossing a threshold that offered no return, she said, "His name was Gideon Lang. He was supposed to help me. Instead, he wanted to own me." "And now?" "He's in the nave," she said, "in the pew behind yours." Father Brown turned slowly. The pew was empty now, But the blood trail hadn't been washed. It was thin, a single smear across the varnished wood. Just enough to say someone had sat there and bled while pretending they weren't dying. "Where did he go?" Father Brown asked gently. She looked down. "I don't know. I think he meant to die here." "And the glove?" "I tried to stop him," she said. "I pressed it to the wound. But he laughed. Said it wasn't the first time someone tried to cover up what he'd done." Father Brown stood and walked down the aisle toward the small utility room where extra hymnals and linens were kept. He opened the door. Inside was Gideon Lang, slumped against the wall, a small black hole, just beneath the heart. His suit was expensive, his shoes polished, but his expression was curiously peaceful, as if he had finally stopped running. There was no gun, no struggle, just him, and the blood, thick and undisturbed, like he'd come here to finish a chapter already written. Father Brown returned to the woman who hadn't moved. "Tell me everything," he said. Her name was Sabine Clay. She had been Lang's assistant once, then his partner, though not officially. Lang ran a string of accounting firms that acted more like laundromats for dirty money. Politicians, gangsters, and men of faith alike had let their sins be polished in his ledgers. Sabine knew where every body was buried, every digit scrubbed clean. "He promised me escape," she said. "A new identity, money, a flight out. I'd helped him keep their secrets for 5 years. Then I made the mistake of telling him I wanted out. And he refused. He said I was too valuable," she whispered. "So I came here." He followed. Said if I told anyone, I'd never make it past the church steps. "But he didn't kill you." "No," she said, voice cracking. "He turned the gun on himself." Father Brown nodded slowly. "So why did you run?" "Because I thought someone would say it was me." He studied her. She didn't flinch. Outside, the rain slowed, but inside, the weight of the storm remained. When Mallory arrived, he took one look at Lang and swore under his breath. "Why do the bodies always end up in churches?" "Because churches are the only places left where people die honestly," Father Brown said. Mallory snorted. "You believe her?" "Yes," Father Brown said, "but you won't. She touched the body. She ran. She also brought him here," Father Brown said, "so he could die near something sacred." Mallory knelt beside the corpse. No weapon. "Any idea where the gun went?" Father Brown looked at Sabine. She shook her head. "She panicked," he said. "Maybe dropped it." "Maybe someone took it." Mallory raised an eyebrow. "Someone else?" "Lang had enemies," Father Brown said, "and not just on ledgers." That night, Father Brown walked the length of Lang's office on Mercier Boulevard. The windows were dark, but the side door had been forced. Inside, drawers were open, papers scattered, not looted, searched. He found a single envelope on the desk, addressed to no one. Inside was a page torn from a register. It listed 4 names, all dead, all within the last year. Next to each, a date. Each matched an accidental death, fires, drownings, and one unsolved shooting. Lang had been keeping score, and maybe preparing his own end. Father Brown returned to the church to find a man waiting, heavy-set, wrinkled suit, greasy smile. He introduced himself as Calvin Blake. "Lang owed me," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. "He can't repay you now," Father Brown said. "No, but the woman can." "She owes you nothing." "She knows everything," Blake said. "That's worth more than any IOU." Father Brown studied him. You plan to collect? I plan to make sure she doesn't talk. You think threats will silence someone already freed? I think bullets talk louder. Father Brown stepped closer. The difference between a debt and a sin is that only one can be forgiven. Blake sneered. Don't try to save her. I'm not, Father Brown said quietly. I'm trying to save you. Blake left, but not before he saw the gun in Father Brown's hand. A small thing, wrapped in cloth, taken from behind the altar, where Lang had placed it before dying. Blake knew what it meant. It meant the weapon had been found, that no one had to lie about how the blood had spilled. 2 days later, Blake was arrested. Not for Lang, but for one of the names on the list, a man named Harold Crane. The shooting once thought to be a mugging was now connected to the same revolver. The forensics didn't lie. Lang hadn't just turned the gun on himself. He'd used it before. Blake had kept it hidden, then moved it once Lang was dead. Sabine disappeared after the inquest. No charges, no trial, just a silent departure and a letter left at the church. He wanted forgiveness, but he waited too long to ask for it. I won't. Father Brown folded the letter and placed it in a drawer beneath the pulpit. The glove, still marked with dried blood, he kept in the sacristy. A reminder that not all relics are holy. That Sunday, the nave was quiet, save for the whisper of new rain and the sigh of the pews remembering the dead. And in the third row, someone else sat quietly, hands folded, head bowed, not in prayer perhaps, but in something close to it. Father Brown passed the glove one last time on his way to the altar. Some confessions are spoken, others are left behind, still warm. Chapter 10. Footsteps echoed after midnight mass. The city had a way of holding its breath just after midnight. All the noise, all the neon, all the clenched fists and whispered threats folded into a kind of brittle silence that clung to the streets like ash. It was in that silence that Father Brown often heard the truth. Not in the confessions or the sermons, but in the spaces between, where lies lost their footing and guilt started to talk. On Christmas Eve, after midnight mass at St. Hilary's, the silence was broken by a single pair of footsteps, echoing long after the last hymn had faded. He heard them from the sacristy, measured, sharp, not the shuffle of the pious or the hesitant retreat of the guilty. This was the sound of someone returning, not leaving. Mass had ended at 12:42. By 1:30, the church should have been empty, except for the scent of candle smoke and the lingering echo of Ave Maria in the rafters. But the steps came, again, this time slower, as if whoever walked the nave was waiting for something, or someone. Father Brown stepped out from the side door, his collar askew, eyes calm. He moved with the patient certainty of a man who'd stopped fearing the dark long ago. A woman stood at the back of the church. Tall, pale, red lips, too deliberate to be devotional. She wore black, but not for mourning. It was a tailored sort of grief, the kind people wore to courtrooms and funerals they'd arranged. Themselves. She had her hand on the back of the pew, not gripping, just resting, like a cat might rest its paw on a trapped bird. Midnight mass is over, Father Brown said gently. Is it ever? She answered. He tilted his head. Sometimes it ends, sometimes it lingers. She walked down the aisle slowly. I used to come here as a girl. My mother lit candles for men she couldn't forgive. And you? I burned them down for men who never repented. She stopped halfway down. He could see now that her gloves were missing, and her hands were trembling, though she hid it well. Her name, she said, was Lila Crane. She was the wife, or widow, depending on how you counted time, of Callum Crane, the city's most polished monster. Real estate, racketeering, charity dinners, and bones beneath, poured concrete. 3 weeks ago, he'd vanished. No ransom, no corpse, just gone. He was supposed to confess, she said, lowering herself into a pew. I told him it was the only way he'd sleep again. And did he? She looked at the altar. He came here last month. I waited outside. When he came out, he said it was done, that he'd confessed and bought himself a little peace. I never heard it, Father Brown said quietly. She turned sharply, but he said, there's another church nearby, or maybe he told it to someone who looked like a priest, or maybe, he added, he told no one and hoped the lie would sound holy enough. She didn't speak for a moment. The sound of her breath was all that filled the nave. Then she reached into her coat and pulled out a silver rosary, the beads smeared with soot. I found this on our doorstep, she said, 2 days after he vanished. He took it. The crucifix was scorched, burned deliberately. A warning, not a ritual. He had seen that kind of mark before years ago, on a man who'd crossed the Balducci family and left town in 6 pieces. You believe he's dead? She asked. I believe. Someone wants you to believe that. And you? I believe sin rarely dies with the sinner. That night, after she left, he stayed behind. There was something wrong with the church. Not in the plaster or the peeling iconography, something beneath. A cold that wasn't in the stone. He went to the confessional, opened it, closed his eyes, waited. The next morning, Mallory showed up at the rectory. He was chewing on a toothpick and looked like he hadn't slept since the depression. You hear about Crane? He asked. I heard he disappeared. Found him last night, or most of him, under the old bell tower near Seacrest. Father Brown sighed. That place is condemned. So are most men in your sermons, Mallory said. He was chained, starved, shot in the chest twice. Execution style. Father Brown nodded. That wasn't vengeance. That was theater. You think the wife did it? She's too angry to be guilty, Father Brown said. People who kill rarely burn rosaries. Mallory snorted. You think someone's trying to turn her into a suspect. I think someone's trying to punish her. Slowly. That evening, a man came to the church during confessions. Mid-30s. Nervous. Reeked of gin and guilt. Said his name was Wesley Todd. He used to work for Crane, numbers, shell companies, safe houses. He said he had nothing to do with the killing, that he left the city a year ago when Crane started digging into old mistakes. He thought he could buy out his sins, Todd said through the screen. He tried to settle with people who didn't want his money anymore. Who did he fear most? Todd paused. There was a woman. Name started with Mona. Monica. Something like that. She used to run errands. Then she ran the books. Is she here? She never left, Todd said. She always said if Callum went first, she'd write the last chapter herself. That night, Father Brown walked to a nightclub called Sanctuary, a red velvet cave filled with old sins and cheap bourbon. He found Monica Arlo in the back booth, counting chips with the same fingers she used to draw blood. She was dressed like loyalty gone sour and spoke like every word had already been judged. You knew he was dead before the papers did, he said. She didn't blink. I know when ghosts stop calling. You delivered the rosary. He left me one, she said. Figured it was time to return the favor. And Lila? She took everything. She watched him ruin men and still wore his name like pearls. She doesn't get to be innocent now. You think pain balances the scale? I think pain is the only currency this city respects. He leaned forward. And what if there's a deeper debt? She smiled. Then I'm still collecting. Later, in the chapel, Father Brown found a note on the altar. No signature, just one line. He never confessed. He never planned to, but she did. He understood then. The footsteps after Mass. They weren't Callum's, they were Lila's. She came back to the church after her husband left. She didn't light candles, she left messages. She sat in the pew and confessed everything, not her crimes, but his. And someone had listened. Someone had waited. Mallory came the next morning. We arrested Monica. We found the room, the chains, the ledger, and Lila. She's gone. Father Brown didn't flinch. She won't go far. She lied to you, Mallory said. No, Father Brown replied. She told me the only truth she had, that she believed he deserved to die. She still played the game. No, Father Brown said softly. She ended it. The next time he heard footsteps after midnight mass, he didn't rise. He listened and let the city breathe. Some sins echo longer than others. Chapter 11. The truth hung from the bell rope. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, long enough that the city no longer looked wet so much as washed out. Colors drained, corners blurred, like a watercolor left too close to the sink. St. Margaret sat hunched in the middle of it all, cloaked in fog and fatigue. The stones of the old bell tower streaked with black runoff like mascara on the face of a woman who'd seen too much and said too little. The bell hadn't rung in over a year. Its rope had frayed, its wheel rusted in place. But late that Thursday night, as Father Brown returned from the hospice with damp cuffs and heavier thoughts, he heard it, just once. A low groan, unmistakable in its weight and solemnity, echoing down the nave like a summons. Not for the congregation, but for him. He paused beneath the vestibule as the rain thinned to mist, and the hush that followed the toll felt deliberate. Not silence, but waiting. Inside the church, the candlelight had guttered. One was still burning, a votive flickering in front of Saint Sebastian. The rest had gone out as if in agreement, a collective breath held too long. And beneath the tower, where the old rope hung from the darkness above, was a man, not kneeling, hanging. Father Brown approached slowly. He had seen death before, but this one had the false stillness of something posed. The man wore a grey suit that had seen better decades. His shoes were polished, his tie carefully knotted, but the noose around his neck was frayed and dug deep into flesh already purpling. It wasn't the messiest death, but it was a loud one, in its own silent way. He looked up at the bell, still rusted, still unmoved. He looked down at the man's pocket, where a single note was pinned with a brass safety pin. Military style. The paper read, "Let the truth ring." By morning, the police had swarmed in, led by Mallory, who looked at the body with the weary resignation of a man who'd stopped being surprised. "Suicide?" he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. "No," Father Brown said. "Too clean, too public." Mallory gave him a side glance. "Hanged himself beneath the bell and wrote a confession." "He wrote a phrase," Father Brown corrected. "That's not the same." "Who is he?" Samuel Vexley, said a voice from behind them. Female, controlled. Father Brown turned to find a woman in black gloves and a coat tailored close to her bones. Her voice was dry, lips painted in the red of a closed casket. He was a city auditor, the honest kind. And you are? Mallory asked. Miranda Vexley, she said. His widow. Father Brown frowned. This happened just hours ago. She nodded. I've been waiting for it. There it was. That strange grief, the kind that hides behind knowledge. The woman who wasn't shocked, not because she was heartless, but because she'd already buried him in her mind. He said, they were. Closing in, she continued. Said the books were bleeding lies, but he never told me who they were. Did he name names? She met Father Brown's eyes. He said, if anything happened, to look at the bell rope. That night, Father Brown climbed the tower. The rope had long been declared dangerous, frayed halfway up, the rest black with rot, but it hadn't snapped. It had been reinforced, spliced with nylon cord, then rewrapped. No one uses an antique rope to hang themselves unless they want to send a message. He looked at the wooden beam above. There were 2 new scratches in the wood, parallel, fresh. Someone had used the bell as theatre. Someone had lifted him up, tied him off, and let him down just enough for it to look self-inflicted. But guilt doesn't stage itself with precision. Shame doesn't tie knots this clean. The next day, Father Brown visited City Hall. It was the kind of building that had 1,000 locked doors and only 3 working elevators. He asked for Vexley's office. The clerk pointed him to the 3rd floor. The door was already open. Inside, a man stood going through drawers with the practiced ease of someone who wasn't worried about being seen. His badge hung low, not displayed. You're either lost or trespassing, the man said. I'm both, most days, Father Brown replied. You're not with the audit department. I'm internal affairs, Detective Colby. Father Brown stepped in. Then you won't mind if I ask why you're looking through a dead man's desk before his body's cold. I'm trying to prevent a panic, Colby said. Vexley had information. Or someone thought he did. Colby narrowed his eyes. You think he was killed? I think he was silenced. Father Brown found a page torn from a ledger, tucked beneath a drawer. It had no names, just numbers. A small red dot in the corner, inked in pen. Do you know what this is? He asked. Colby glanced at it. Payrolls, department codes. Father Brown nodded. And the dot? Colby shrugged. Could be nothing. Could be everything. That evening, Miranda came to the church. They sent someone, she said. Told me to keep quiet, that my husband died clean, and it would stay that way. Father Brown asked, Did they threaten you? Not directly, she said, but they left something on my steps. He followed her to the townhouse near Whitaker and Vine. A single white envelope sat on the welcome mat. Inside was a clipping, an article from 20 years ago. A priest named Caro found dead in his cell after accusing the city of laundering charity funds. It's a warning, she said, or a reminder. Father Brown took the clipping. Sometimes it's both. He went to the archives next. It took hours, but he found what he needed. Vexley had once worked in the Bishop's Office of Urban Development, years before becoming an auditor. The red dot was used in internal memos. It meant sealed under pastoral privilege. It wasn't a payroll, it was a cover-up. Donations from a church program had been funneled into property buys on the south side. Bought cheap, sold high. The men involved had all moved up. one into the mayor's office, one into the DA's seat, and one had become Bishop Malloran. Father Brown sat with it that night in the church, alone. The bell above him still hadn't moved, but he thought about the phrase, "Let the truth ring." It wasn't metaphor, it was location. He went to the tower again. This time, he searched the cavity behind the wall where the rope mechanism was housed. Inside a rusted box marked Archival, he found it. A second ledger, this one handwritten in Vexley's neat, angry script. Names, amounts, properties, transfers, and a note, paper-clipped to the front. If you're reading this, then I failed. But maybe the bell will still ring. Mallory didn't like it, not because it wasn't real, but because it was. "You sure about this?" he asked, holding the ledger like it might catch fire. "I'm sure it was worth dying for," Father Brown said. "What do you want me to do?" "Read it. And then?" "Ring the bell." Mallory shook his head. "You always this poetic?" "No," Father Brown said, "but justice ought to be loud once in a while." The news broke that week. Resignations, investigations, protests. The bell rang again. Properly this time. It didn't fix the city, but it cracked something open, and in a world full of silence, that was enough. Chapter 12. The corpse knew his name. The city was coughing up smoke by the time Father Brown stepped out of the rectory. Not the holy kind that clings to incense and drifts past pews like a prayer that got lost. This was the smoke of burnt secrets, the kind that snakes out from alley barrels and backroom bar brawls, the kind that tastes like something's already died but hasn't been buried yet. The fog rolled in with it, muting neon signs and drowning sirens in molasses. He tightened his collar and walked down Mercer Street, where the broken lamp on the corner blinked like an old man's eye, half open, full of warnings. The message came before dawn, a scrap of paper tucked beneath the church doors like a sin someone was too ashamed to speak aloud. On it, 3 words in blocky, near-childish letters. "He knew you." That's all. No return address, no signature, just a single drop of dried blood on the corner. And below it, written smaller, as if second thoughts crept in while writing, "Come to Dock 9. By 8 that morning, the sun still hadn't shone. The clouds didn't part. They hung there like curtains waiting to close on a final act no one wanted to see. Father Brown walked past warehouses that had long given up pretending they stored goods. Now they held secrets, bodies, guns, promises. Dock 9 sat crooked at the edge of the harbor, splintered wood and rusted bolts holding onto each other like drunks after last call. A single police car was parked outside. Mallory stood nearby, rain streaking down his trench coat, smoking like it mattered. "You got here fast," the inspector said, flicking ash into the water. "You called me," Father Brown replied. Mallory didn't correct him. "Guy's in there. Dead less than an hour. No ID, no wallet. Just this." He handed him a paper scrap, sealed in an evidence bag. Same handwriting, same message. He knew you. Inside the boathouse, the corpse lay slumped beside a rotted rope. Spool, mid-30s, good suit, ruined by blood and salt water. His hands were bound behind him, but the knot was sloppy, like it had been tied in haste, not habit. His face was battered, but not beyond recognition. Father Brown didn't know the man's name, but the corpse knew his. On the man's right hand was a silver ring with a red enamel crest, 3 arrows and a flame. He'd seen it once before, years ago, when a politician came to confession not for absolution, but for timing. That ring had belonged to the Red Pike Club, a group of businessmen and political players who liked their wine expensive and their witnesses quiet. "Who found him?" Father Brown asked. "Anonymous tip," Mallory said. "Payphone near St. Jude's." Father Brown looked down. There was something strange about the corpse's face. Not the bruises, the expression, not fear, not pain, recognition, and something close to satisfaction. "He died knowing something," Father Brown said. "He died knowing someone," Mallory corrected. The press hadn't arrived yet, but the vultures were circling. Word was out. Someone had been silencing the loose threads of the Red Pike Club, and this one didn't go quietly. Back at the church, a woman waited for him. Tall, elegant, wrapped in a coat that cost more than the chapel organ repairs. Her hair was dark and pinned with care. She wore gloves, but not for fashion, the kind of gloves that could handle a pistol or a ledger without smudges. "You're Father Brown," she said. "My name is Elise Corrin." He nodded once. "How may I help you?" She hesitated. Then she placed a small folder on the pew between them. Inside, photographs, documents, names, all tied to Red Pike, and one photo, circled in red, of the dead man from the dock. His name was Mason Kell. He worked for my husband, used to launder money through church donations. He'd gone missing 3 days ago. "And your husband?" "Jonathan Corrin. You may have heard of him." "I've heard him mentioned by people who don't mention names," Father Brown said. She allowed a small smile. "Then you understand." "I understand secrets don't stay buried unless you know where the shovel is." Her expression darkened. "Mason had come to me, said he was scared, said someone was going to kill him. And you didn't go to the police." She shook her head. "Mason wasn't innocent. He had too much blood on his hands, but he wanted to confess. To me, he said he was going to see a priest, said he needed someone who wouldn't judge him." Father Brown folded the folder closed. He didn't get the chance. She didn't argue. Instead, she handed him a slip of paper. "He left this for me. I didn't understand it until this morning." The paper had a single sentence. "If I don't make it, he will. He—" Father Brown knew enough about pronouns to know this one wasn't generic. It was specific. Kell wasn't warning about the club. He was warning about someone inside it. That evening, Father Brown walked to the Rose and Nail, a bar that had once housed bootleggers and now served overpriced drinks to politicians who wanted to be seen slumming it. In the back booth sat Jonas Grigg, a retired fixer whose fingerprints were on more ballots than most voting machines. He looked up as Father Brown sat down, grimaced, and poured 2 fingers of something lethal. "I heard about Kell," Grigg said. "You knew him?" "I knew his debts." Father Brown placed the folder on the table. "I think someone's cleaning house." Grigg didn't flinch. "That house has too many rooms." "And too many ghosts." Grigg finished his drink. "Corrin's not the man you think." "No one is," Father Brown said. "But some are closer than others." Grigg leaned in. He kept things quiet because he knew the right words. But Kell knew where the files were. Audio, video, names, where. That's the thing. He didn't say, just left a message before he vanished. Said the files were with someone who'd never opened them, unless forced. Father Brown knew the type. Someone who carried the truth like a time bomb but never lit the fuse. That's what Kell had become. But the fuse had been lit now, and it was burning towards something ugly. The next morning, the bell at St. Margaret's rang again. Once, long and heavy, but this time, it wasn't a summons, it was a signal. Attached to the bell rope was a small USB drive, taped to the side. Barely noticeable, a whisper instead of a shout. He took it to the back office, plugged it in. Inside were 5 files. 4 were standard corruption, kickbacks, threats, photos of briefcases changing hands. The 5th was different. It was video, low-res, grainy, but clear enough. Jonathan Corrin, Mason Kell, and a third man, Father Brown. Not recent, years old, a fundraiser. Brown had spoken there, blessed the food. Later that night, Kell had pulled him aside, said something in his ear. In the video, Father Brown's face didn't change. But now he remembered. Kell had asked him, "How do you get rid of a sin you're still committing?" And Father Brown had said, "You don't, you just stop committing it." Kell had looked at him like that was the most terrifying thing he'd ever heard. The video ended, and in the folder's final message, typed in plain text, "If you're reading this, you were the only one I trusted to tell the truth." That night, Brown went to Corrin's penthouse, walked in like he belonged. The guards didn't stop him. He found the man alone, drink in hand, window open to the storm. "I assume you know why I'm here," Brown said. Corrin turned. "To judge me?" "No," Brown said. "To remind you." "Of what?" "That the corpse knew my name. Not because I buried him, but because he believed I'd keep digging." Corrin didn't move. "You're not a cop." "No," Brown said, "but I know how to bury sins. And I know when to let them rot in the open." He placed the USB on the table. "You won't need to watch it," he said. "You were there." Corrin's voice was quiet. "What now?" "You can confess," Brown said, "or you can wait until the city finds out." Corrin laughed. Bitter. "They won't care." "Maybe," Brown said, "but the bell will ring again, and this time they'll listen." When the arrest came, it wasn't loud, but it was public. And when the next midnight mass came, the church was fuller than it had been in years. People came not for absolution, but for truth. And as Father Brown lit the final candle, he looked up at the bell and knew it would ring again when it had to.